Welcome to Nuclecast, the official podcast of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowther, co-founder and vice president for research at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. The ANWA Deterrence Center is a 501c3 organization ensuring a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent and its ongoing modernization. Thank you for listening and welcome to the show. The views of the host and the guests are their own.
Welcome back to another great episode of Nuclecast. Of course, as always, I am your host, Adam Lowther. Now, by the time you hear this podcast, I'm sure today is December the 4th, so our podcasts usually take a few weeks before they're actually aired. But I doubt Alabama will have won the national title by then. But as of yesterday, they made it to the college football playoff, so I want to give my Crimson Tide a good roll tide. Now, of course, our guest today is Tyler Hamilton, and Tyler is a future systems engineer at the Ares Corporation supporting the Artemis program. But that's not actually why Tyler is with us today. He's actually with us because he spent the last decade as a ICBM maintainer, and we wanted to have him on because we have a lot of senior Air Force officers, and we've talked a lot about education, workforce management, but we've never really talked from the enlisted perspective. And with Tyler recently leaving the Air Force, we thought we'd have him on to talk about that decade that he spent in the Air Force, out in the missile fields, maintaining the actual weapon, and that perspective, so that for you, the listeners, many of you who are pretty senior in the profession, can perhaps better understand that enlisted perspective. So with that, Tyler, welcome to Nuclecast.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the platform and the opportunity to talk with you today.
So let's sort of talk about, if you're a missile maintainer and you've got the missile field is more than 50,000 square miles. It's a big place, and you're out there actively driving around to LFs, and you're maintaining missiles, you're fixing, repairing, replacing, doing all of that. So from your perspective, how did you see deterrence and this larger mission that you and the missile cops and all the other enlisted folks that made this mission possible, how did y'all see deterrence?
So, deterrence was explained when we first started school, and you understand the concept of it. And then you finish your schooling, you head up to your base up north, and then it's just kind of nonstop with the mission, where you're told that, hey, Alpha 9 has an MGS, a missile guidance system, that's down, go fix it. And that's about the extent of your understanding of why, because you don't really get briefed on why things are such high priorities or anything like that. It isn't until I was about 5 years into my Air Force career that I was extended the opportunities to go to some EWO briefings and some other PME along those lines to get a better understanding of what deterrence is and how we work together with not only us within the missile maintenance squadron, but then the other wings, the Navy, the other parts of the bombers, which we never even saw being at FE Warren. You get a bigger understanding of what it means to be a part of it and kind of what our role in deterrence is. So that's at least from what our perspective was.
Now, from my time as a Air Force professor within the professional military education. So when we say PME, professional military education, from my time in that system, I remember doing a study where we looked at the amount of time within an officer's career that they would go through, Air Command and Staff, War College, Squadron Officer School, all of these educational opportunities. And then we looked at PME, enlisted PME, and then we also looked at civilian PME for Air Force civil servants, and the amount of time that an officer will go through school is about 8 to 10 times, across that 20 to 25 year career. They'll spend about 8 times more time in school than the enlisted will, and about 10 times more than the average civil servant will. And so I guess my question for you is, was the PME for the enlisted force adequate or inadequate, and particularly when it comes to this really important sort of cultural aspect of, bluing as a guy who's out there doing the mission, to where you said, hey man, what I'm doing is really important, and I see the why I'm sacrificing. Was that something that your squadron commander did? Was it a function of PME? What are your thoughts on that?
So on the enlisted side, I feel like it was inadequate. I feel like there was only a few opportunities for a select few people to actually get those opportunities, or to get those chances to even go to such places. You really just the squadron commanders are there to kind of explain to you just how important everything is. But I mean, from my career, the first time I even got a real showing of how important uh, ICBMs were was in 2016, when I was given the chance to do a flight test out at Vandenberg, and I got to see an actual ICBM go off that I put together for the first time. And then it wasn't until later on in my career when I got opportunities to learn more at Lawrence Livermore, and then I eventually got to go to the District College and the Air Force Nuclear Weapons College in Kirkland. Um, but it's tough because mission demands are so strict, and especially with the 2MO field, where we've always been kind of struggling when it came to manning. So it's hard to let go of those bodies to give them the chances to go to those types of schools.
So if you were, well, I'll save this question for when Bob shows up, but you haven't met Bob yet, but you'll meet Bob near the end. But if you think about, what you were able to do versus what the average maintainer, cop, other enlisted force that are out in the missile fields is able to do, the opportunities that you had, like to go to, Nuke 200, for example, would you say that was common or uncommon? And was there a appetite amongst your fellow airmen to go do that kind of stuff? And then, my follow-on question is, once you did it, would you say, if you were acting, on behalf of the Air Force and evaluating the utility of spending that time and money pulling you out of your daily job, was it worth it? And would it be worth it for others to go do those kinds of week-long trainings, or, go to the DITRA, Defense Nuclear Weapons School for courses? What's your take on that?
So to the first question, I would say uncommon. For the example, a course like Nuclear 200, but very much sought after by everyone within the community, just for the opportunity to go to Kirkland and be a part of that course. And the second one, if it was up to me, I would be, obviously trying to keep the mission going, but understanding, because after I left there and was able to learn and experience that, it almost, I would say almost, because I still ended up separating. It almost reblued me because of and made me really appreciate what I do. So if given the opportunity, I would be pushing as much as I could to get people out there to do that type of stuff.
Now that sort of
Just because it's
brings,
not it's knowledge that the enlisted don't get. Sorry.
that's a good, it's a good point. It's a valid point. Now, you sort of brought this up, so I want to pull on this thread a little bit more, and that is this idea of, it's a topic across the entire not just the Air Force, but the DOE. And this is the idea of bringing people in and then keeping them. And so as we've talked to DOE folks and we look at the labs and elsewhere, the labs have the question was, can we bring enough scientists in and then can we keep them? And we've seen that they're getting out at about the 6-year mark. They'll come into DOE, they'll go to Sandia or Livermore, Los Alamos or wherever. And then they sort of leave after they've got about 6 years of experience. Now for you stayed in for a decade and then you made the choice to leave. So if we want to talk about retention, because for the Air Force, it's, the Air Force it's a skilled, high skilled job that needs lots of guys and gals who stay in and make a career of it. That's sort of the ideal for the Air Force, is to keep everybody for, 20 years, whether it's pilots or, missile maintenance. It doesn't really matter. You need those folks to come in, gain the skills, gain proficiency, and then progress throughout a career. But for those who are getting out, talk to me about what makes you make that decision.
So it wasn't initially when I enlisted, I was kind of in the thought process that I was just going to do my time and get out after. But being deep into it for a couple years, I kind of realized how much I did love it, even though how tough it was and how cold and everything it was in Wyoming. But at the end of the day, this job's tough on the individual, not only mentally and emotionally, but especially physically. So I've been beaten up over the last 10 years and stolen my wife away from her family for the last 10 years. So I thought, as much as I would have loved to stay in and keep contributing to the missile maintenance mission, I needed to put my family first. So that was kind of where my head was at with everything.
Now for, many of your colleagues and, the airmen out there, would you say that this idea of, that the challenge, because the wings at Minot and Malmstrom and F.E. Warren, they're fairly remote and they're not near large tropical cities. Would you say that sort of that challenge and the remoteness challenge is what makes people decide, hey, this is putting the extra stress on my family? Or would you say that there are, other reasons that make people decide, to leave? What would be the, as you talk to your fellow airmen, what would be the main reasons they say that they want to leave?
So that remoteness is definitely a big factor, just because they're like you stated, they're out in the middle of nowhere. The two other things that I saw that were big factors that made people decide to separate were, one, the work and the kind of the sense of fulfillment from the job. Just because you look at any crew chief or anybody else in maintenance, right? You get to you work all day, you sweat, blood, tears all over this plane, and then you get to see that the fruits of your labor fly off. With us, you don't see that, right? You drive 3 hours to a site, you work out there for 12 hours, and then you drive all the way home, and it just sits there. So you're just in your head, you're like, oh, it could go, it couldn't, and then you don't really get to see that. I was lucky enough that I got the opportunity to do that test flight in Vandenberg and then see my work, what I did while I was out there, actually is launching now. But yeah, I think that would be one of the biggest ones, or the two, really. The areas are not great, and that job satisfaction.
This episode of Nuclecast is brought to you by the ANWA Deterrence Center, whose mission is to educate Americans about the nuclear enterprise and strategic deterrence.
So we've had on a previous issue, we had the deputy wing commanders for the missile wing and the bomber wing at Minot were on the show and talked a lot about the efforts that they're undertaking to make those places attractive to live. And for you, and I remember I was a young enlisted guy on board the USS Ramage in Norfolk, Virginia, and for me as a young guy, fresh out of high school, wanting to see the world and travel, and the challenge was I saw a poll that consistently Norfolk, Virginia has been the best place in America if you are a single woman looking for a spouse, because the ratio of men to women is like 6 men to 1 woman. And so what that means is if you're a young sailor who may want to build a family and all of that, it's a really bad place to be. And so as you think about the wings and, Minot, Malmstrom, and F.E. Warren, and a lot of young guys that are going up there, it's their first assignment, they're young, they're 19, 20, 21 years old, and they want to do the normal things that young guys do. Is the Air Force making a strong effort, or the best effort they can, because these choices were made back in the 1950s and 60s, and for very good strategic reasons to put these missiles where they are. And so then the Air Force has to build the base and then build the culture in a community given those strategically chosen restraints. Is the Air Force doing what it can and should in the local communities? Because Minot has a very strong community effort to try to work with the base and make things as good as possible. So sort of as you've spent that decade in the missile wings, what would you say about that effort, and what could be done better or differently?
No, I would 100% agree that the wings do a great job in trying to make the best of a kind of a bad situation. When I was a instructor in Vandenberg, you have these kids come in straight out of basic training, and then they see the list of the spots that they can go, and it's not great. But we try to let them know, hey, there's a lot to do out there, and the bases make that known as well. And especially, I'll give, as much as I don't want to do this, I'll give credit to Minot, just because every person I've met from Minot just is trying to get back there, just because of the culture and everything they built there and how tight knit the community was. So some do it better than others, but I will say the Air Force does do a good job in trying to build that sense of community, build that culture, to make you have somewhat of an enjoyable time in those at those bases.
And then, so if you were, if you were the one, decision maker, what would you do differently?
What I would do differently is something they did for the security forces members up north at those bases. Was put what is called a Code 50, a mandatory mover, on them, just so they can get out of the base after a couple years. Bringing something like that and giving more opportunities for the people within the ICBM community, the ability to move around and see other things would be great. My first boss at F.E. Warren was at F.E. Warren for 22 years. Another boss I had was there for 12, and then I was there for 7. It's hard to leave sometimes. So I think that would be something that I would want to try, and just get them the ability to go see other bases, see other opportunities.
Now let's go back to the question of PME. And one of the things you had said earlier in the conversation was that after going to Nuke 200, you were almost reblued and decided to stay. And so that leads me to believe that the kind of education,
Almost.
yeah, almost, but that kind of education does work, and it's successful. So would you say that you'd like to see the enlisted force go to more PME? But I guess my question is if you were being strategic about the utilization of PME, would you send, an airman basic? Would you send somebody as soon as they become an NCO? Do you think it needs to be later in their career? How would you, if you could sort of plan out, sending the enlisted force to these kinds of PME opportunities, what guidance would you give, Air University and, AETC, if they were listening to this podcast and wanted to know how they could do it better?
I think strategically, say you have a young airman, you're looking to send them to those opportunities when enlistment's coming up, it's coming close, to try and make them realize how big of a role they play in all this. And then with everyone else, I think at least every other year you should be going and learning something new, or learning something. I had plenty of friends who got the opportunity to go spend some time on subs, seeing the other parts of the triad. But yeah, I would try and get it, as much as possible. But
and so there's no specific sort of, after it's, but prior to, your enlistment coming up, because that would be a great time to re-blue somebody, is prior to them having to make the decision of stay or go. So that's sort of a wise and easily verifiable kind of point. But is there any other sort of advice you would offer for AETC, Air Education Training Command, Air University? For you to come on the podcast, this is kind of your big opportunity to talk to a much larger audience about your Air Force experience. And I wonder what sage advice that could be useful and helpful to the Air Force would you offer them? Because the Air Force, like, the Army and the Navy, they're having recruiting challenges, and retention is always, it's always an issue. So what advice would you give that could potentially help?
I think the advice that I would give would be give the enlisted more chances to learn, or try and find a way to give us as many opportunities, because as officers got, when it came to learning more about the system and learning more about our role within deterrence and everything like that, it just always felt like whenever those opportunities came up, enlisted were the last ones to fill those slots, where the CGOs and everything like that were the first ones to go, because those opportunities to go and see more, from what I've seen in my experience, is what has brought people back from getting out. They see just how important everything is, and they are re-blued in an Air Force sense, to want to keep contributing to that mission. So that's luckily I worked in AETC for the last couple of years, so I've given plenty of my thoughts to them, but that would be mine, is just more chances.
Now, General Huser, the 20th Air Force commander, she's a friend of the show, and she's been on before, and I wonder if she were listening right now, and she's listening, and she's like, okay, so I gotta try to send more enlisted folks to these courses, send them before their enlistments are up, so she knows when to do it. But this issue of family, what would you offer to her as sage advice for, because this issue of family is one that a lot of people, it's a it's one of the key drivers for why people don't stay is the pressures and the strains on family. How is there a way she could alleviate some of that strain? And, what potentially would have made you stay?
I don't know if I really have an answer for her. With the job that I did, we were home every single night. Didn't really have to worry about deploying or anything like that. The thing that just drove people to make that decision was just being out there, and there's nothing we can do, sadly, about the locations of the bases. So I really don't have an answer to that question in particular for Colonel Huser, who was my former wing commander at FE, so I am familiar with her. But yeah.
Now let's switch to now
or General Huser. I apologize.
She was Colonel Huser whenever she was your wing commander, so we understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Now so when you made the decision to get out, you participated in the SkillBridge program, which is something we've never talked about on Nuclecast. Can you tell the audience what SkillBridge is, and is it a good thing, a bad thing? Does it work? Does it not work?
So SkillBridge is a program where a member of the armed services is allowed to leave up to 180 days early from when their DOS is and participate in a unpaid internship with a vetted company through so they go through the process of applying through the DoD, and you're able to go work there as an unpaid intern. And no, I thought it was great. The Ares Corporation had reached out to me because of my experience with aerospace, and then also my experience with training and development, working as an ATC instructor, and had brought me on originally to be a training development intern with them, and eventually moved me over to NASA's Future Systems Project Office to help as an integration engineer over there. And it was if anybody is on the fence about getting out of the military, I would highly recommend it. It was a great program, got me to where I am today, so I have nothing but good things to say about it.
Now we're at that point in the show where I want to bring out my good friend Bob. So Bob is my magic genie, and if I rub my lamp, Bob pops out, and Bob grants 3 wishes to all Nuclecast guests. Now the wishes have to be related to the topics we've been discussing today. He doesn't grant wealth or prosperity or anything like that. Only what we talk about. So if we were to, Bob gives you your 3 wishes about our topics today, what would be wish number 1?
Wish number 1 would be the missile wings were closer to a beach.
Now that's a big wish. Yeah, it's the proximity.
It's cold up there.
It does get cold. See, fortunately for me, I like that. I like cold weather, so it's never bothered me. And I grew up on the Gulf Coast, and I always hated the heat and humidity. So I've always looked to move further north. But that may not be for everybody. So that's wish number 1. That's one. I think many missile maintenance and missileers and bomber guys they'd all have that. But wish number 2, what would that be?
Wish number 2 would be like we talked about earlier, more of those opportunities for enlisted men and women to go learn more about the system that we work on. They come by, but there's never enough money, or there's never enough slots for everybody to get the opportunity to. So that would be my second wish, is for everybody to get those chances.
Okay, that's another good wish. more enlisted PME. Now, how about wish number 3?
Whew. I'm not sure yet. You can put me on the spot here. Wish number 3. I'm gonna go with Michigan beating Alabama in the national championship because I couldn't think of anything else.
All right. Well, there are people who love to hate the Crimson Tide, so I won't take it personally. Well, Tyler, thanks for
my sister goes to Georgia, so she's quite devastated.
Yeah, she's probably a little disappointed after Saturday's game. Well, thanks for coming on NucleCast. We appreciate it. It was really our first opportunity to get an enlisted perspective and to talk through some of what the enlisted force, the majority of the Air Force, what the enlisted force is thinking about, and particularly as we talk about the missile fields and the challenges and in daily life and work in those environments. So thanks for coming on NucleCast to talk with us about that.
No, I appreciate it. Any opportunity I can have to speak highly of the men and women that I worked with up there, I'm always going to take that chance, and appreciate the time.
And thanks to you, the listeners, for joining us on this episode of NucleCast, and we'll see you on the next episode. Well, had an interesting time talking with Tyler. It was, it's always interesting to hear the perspectives of folks you don't always talk to. And we generally don't talk to the enlisted force for NucleCast. We generally talk to senior leaders and get their perspectives and takes on things. But really, when it comes down to it, the nuclear mission depends upon maintainers and cops and, all of the supply force. And there's all of these folks doing all of this work in the background that we often don't really, we don't think about. They don't get, all the glory. And so it was good to talk to Tyler and sort of hear his perspective on, what he liked about his job, what he wished he had more of, and why he left. So hopefully for you, if you as a listener in a position to influence that, you've at least got one more data point that you can, take into account and make things better for the Air Force.
This has been a production of the ANWA Deterrence Center, a 501c3 that seeks to educate key decision makers, stakeholders, and the public to ensure a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent. Our executive producer is Kimberly Charrington, and this episode has been engineered and mixed by David Grunthal. Help us grow our followers by sharing it and follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at NucleCast.